I am so privileged because I think I've got the most exciting panel here now. And I know all the other chairs of panels have serious envy of this, but I have both the privilege of having two very, very senior, experienced, visionary, and courageous leaders joining here on stage, and the topic being a topic which invites us to be creative, to be bold, to really think a bit in unusual ways. So, with this, I'd like to invite on stage Jewel Taylor. Jewel Taylor is a real powerhouse in Africa. She's the Vice President of Liberia, and she also is a member of the Women Political Leaders Executive Board. She was appointed by the previous President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who you all know and admire, to be in that position, and we're very privileged to have you here, Jewel. Thank you. My other conversationist is José Manuel Barroso, who wouldn't really need an introduction, but I do it anyways. He used to be the Prime Minister of Portugal, and while he was Prime Minister, he had a woman Finance Minister and a woman Minister of Justice, two positions that are rarely held by women. Then he was, at the same time like I was a member of European Parliament, he was the big boss, the President of the European Commission, and he introduced that rule that 30% of the commissioners have to be women. And now he's the non-executive chairman of Goldman Sachs Global. A big round of applause for him as well, please. So, as I said, we want to be a bit creative and bold here on stage. And we've been discussing leading a digital age. We've been discussing about future technologies. We've heard many times this power together concept. So, Jewel, I'd like to ask you from your experience as a leader in a country that went through really, really hard times, but being very active on the global level, what do you see as, picking up on the previous session, the magic key, the bold idea that would help make things better in the world?
Thank you for this opportunity, Sylvia, and I'm really happy to be here. Funny thing is, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And as you look at our world today, what are some of the issues? Violence against women, extreme poverty, environmental degradation, increase of hatred, violence, crisis and war, incapacity of the young people, sickness and disease is a long order. As we look at all of these things, I think the best we can do, those of us who have certain mandates to govern and be a part of the changes that you're talking about, is to find a way of peaceful coexistence. And it might sound funny, but we need to show a little bit of love. I believe if you love someone, or if you love your planet, or if you love your community, your attitude, the things that you think about, the programs that you implement are totally different. They're not selfish, they're inclusive, and I think that is what we need, just in a nutshell, as we begin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This is a very, very value-driven approach. Think about love and really bring it to the core of why are we actually on this planet and the things that you describe on the different levels. Thank you very much. José Manuel, you had many, many different functions, positions, had to steer through crisis. If now you would be in the position to say, okay, I have this one idea, it's going to just happen on the globe, what would that idea be?
It's not very original, and it was already said this morning, but I continue to think that the great idea is education. I really believe it's the area where we need to invest more, not only financially, but invest intellectually, invest with love, invest from a psychological point of view, including, of course, the issue of women or girls that in some parts of the world have not yet access to education as men or boys have. Having said that, I think today we have a specific problem, not only in Europe, but we have it in the United States, we have it in Asia. There is a rise of nationalism, aggressive nationalism. So in fact, we may have problems concerning the issue of peace. So I consider to a large extent is a reaction to globalization. and the financial crisis has increased this sentiment. So today, many of our citizens, they feel some anxiety towards the world. They feel that even their leaders do not control what's going on. And so we see what we have been calling sometimes populism, chauvinism, xenophobia, racism, and aggressive nationalism. So I think, to a large part, what we have to do is to have, as you call a conversation, a global conversation that we have to establish to avoid the risks of war. We have spoken, for instance, today about technology. But one of the issues about technology is that the trade competition that we are seeing, to a large extent, will be determined by who leads technological the world, namely some technologies that can also make war. Some of these technologies, from, let's say, artificial intelligence to quantum computing, they are at the center today of global competition. And so let's not be naive. I'm in favor of technology and science, but I will not be surprised to see that there will be a much more tensions today in the world, namely, let's put it frankly, because you ask us to be bold, between the United States and China, some kind of competition around technologies that can be decisive for global hegemony.
But many of the things that you describe have been identified, let's say, by the World Economic Forum, by others, as the global threats that people really have on their mind. And when you talk about nationalism, and you talk about extremism, and Jewel mentioned peace, doesn't that come back to this concept of love that you mentioned, and which the audience, with that spontaneous applause, seem to appreciate? But then taking up your point of education, how can we educate for greater respect, for love, for mutual understanding, for openness?
So
how can we do that?
Maybe you could sum up saying, make love, not war. That could be a good summary. Now, the point is, you know, one of the happiest days of my life was when, on behalf of the European Union, I went to Oslo to receive the Nobel Peace Prize given to the European Union. Precisely because the European Union has been an example from a point of view of putting former enemies together. And today it's, I would say, impossible or almost unthinkable to conceive a war between countries that for so many centuries were fighting with terrible consequences. And when I made the speech of acceptance of Nobel Peace Prize, I started quoting Spinoza. Spinoza said, war is not it's not simply the absence of, peace is not simply the absence of war. Peace is a state of mind, the state of benevolence, as he said. And I think this is the issue. The culture of peace. The culture that we may love our countries, we are patriots, but we don't see our countries against others. So open patriotism. So there is a French author who said once, patriotism is to love what is ours. Nationalism is the hate of others. This is the point, the difference. So we can love our country and our people and our community, and at the same time be open to the global, to mankind in general. And so to promote this culture of openness, I think this is the key for the new generations.
Jewel, in your country, that's kind of a rough journey, right? You've recently, it's not too long ago that it was civil war with atrocities, and people continue living next door with each other. How do you implement that thought of respect, of love, of loving yourself, but also respecting your others, loving others? How do you do that?
I think at two levels. The first level is at the family level. And sometimes it makes you wonder what we who are parents are teaching our children. We get involved in our activities and in our careers, and I have to do this for me. And so we pass that on to our children, that is about you, and it's not about us. So in the families, people are struggling, to get the best of something or to be the best. There's that competition that's begun very early amongst our children, and we don't teach them that even though you want to be the best that you want to be, there's somebody out there that could be better. Is it a reason for hate? No, it's not. The second level is the media. I think the media spreads a lot of hate, a lot of violence by some of the stories. Why is it there might be a very, very good story that never comes up in the media? By the time there's crisis or conflict, that takes over the news. And when they play it on CNN or whatever stations we're watching, you see that they make people believe that it's a us against them war, and that's what flows into our communities, and it's very difficult. So coming from a war situation, we were forced to disarm our arms, we're forced to live together, but the truth is, the issue of reconciliation is still a problem. We've not yet reconciled, because many people, maybe some people feel they haven't said the truth in order to be forgiven. Some people have just gone and said, well, I didn't do anything. There are people who believe their families were murdered and no one cares. So it's a bubbling thing underneath. We need to get to the point to say exactly what our roles were and accept whatever punishments could be available. And then we begin to build. But again, it starts from the communities and the families. What are they thinking? What are they teaching their children? Are we teaching hate? And I think without knowing it, some of us actually teach hate to our children by thinking it's about me only and not about us in a global context.
Well, we will have tomorrow a discussion on the impact of technology, trolls on truth, and how does this influence the view that people have on each other or on certain topics. Given this new digital reality and the ever-changing circumstances, ideas travel much faster, news travel faster, thoughts travel faster, criticism travels faster. As a leader, how do you handle that?
It's tough, but I think the digital world provides on-the-spot information about what's happening. It can no longer be hearsay, or maybe someone didn't understand it. Whatever you do is transmitted across the world in an instant. And so it forces people to taper their behavior and to begin to conform to what the world used to see. And I think it's good in that way, but there's also a tendency to spread, again, hate and crisis and war, which we have to find a way to balance.
José Manuel, there are, in the past few years, several big political, political negotiations heavily influenced through digital and through mass media, being several free trade agreements, because you referenced to that, which all of a sudden became a mass movement. We saw demonstrations of people who had never shown interest in free trade issues before or negotiations as such. And this was through this new means of influencing debate and people coming to sort of the negotiation room, which wouldn't usually have had a seat at the table in the pre-digital times. In very kind of critical and technically difficult negotiations, how can you handle that a new weight that one needs to factor in? It's
completely different from before. And maybe if I can share my experience, I was very young, a foreign minister, and at that time, the foreign ministers were members of the European Council. So I had the honor to be in the same European Council with Helmut Kohl, with François Mitterrand, with Jacques Delors, so many. And sometimes today in Europe, people say, oh, those were the greatest times. There is some kind of negative nostalgia. At that time, we were only 12 countries. And in fact, as a politician, because I also was prime minister in my country, as a politician, I was only concerned with the 8 o'clock news. We had to prepare. Now we have to be 24 hours. So it's for a political leadership today, it's much more difficult. Political and other kinds of leadership. In fact, there are some authors who speak about the end of power, because the conditions of power, including corporate power, media power, civil associations, the nature of power has changed completely. And so we have to learn to deal with that. On itself, social media, for instance, can be good, because it's a way of democratization, but can be also bad. So what is the solution? I certainly will not say to put limits to the information. On the contrary, what we have is to have more leaders to engage and to try to win the debate, to win the global conversation. But there is a huge debate. For instance, now just to give an example, today, now in Brazil, the last election in Brazil, the new president won almost without appearing in the television. because he comes from a party that is a very minority party, and there the time is allocated considered. But he won only through WhatsApp. He has not made campaign publicly because he was attacked. So, and with WhatsApp, Trump won basically with social media. Before, Obama won through the internet. Before, Kennedy won the television. So we went from television, classic internet, social media, including WhatsApp. So we are changing completely the ways of communication. And so for those leaders who want to come with what I believe are good values, like the value of peace, the value of gender equality, the value of respect for human rights, we have to be present and to try to win that debate there and not to close. We have to be more open.
And I think specifically in a country like Iceland, where in 1986, Presidents Gorbachev and Reagan shook hands to end the Cold War, and media reporting was at the time, apparently I've been told by Icelandic friends, on the doorknob of the house where they met, because nothing else happened. Today, like 8 o'clock news, this wouldn't be the thing. There would be much more and other ways of involving and including thoughts. Finishing off, Jewel, we talked about this morning about the redefinition of power, of this power together, and José Manuel just made a very, very strong pledge for that and conversation in this. How would you see the chances, and what does it take to make these chances reality, to get this power together to the leaders of this world?
Well, the digital age helps us tremendously, because if you're able to utilize it to carry information or to provide mentoring or all of the different things that we do, then it helps to get your voice and your opinion out there. So it makes it a little bit easier, and it brings us together. We must network, we must meet. I still think, as someone who was born before computers, I always say BBC, born before computers, we have to network. We have to meet. I mean, meetings like this are so important that you actually get a chance to see people and talk about the ideas. So the digital world is out there, but I think your presence is much more significant as we discuss these ideas and we go back home with a more concrete thought in our minds as what to do to ensure that we're working for a peaceful, coexistent world where all of us have equal rights and the opportunities are available regardless of who you are. So it helps working together. We must manage both of them because I think they all have their own benefits. This conference could have been held online, and the panelists would have sat here, and then we would be on the internet. We'll reach many, many, many more persons, and it is being carried live. But I think just my presence here is definitely much more engaging to me because you get a chance to meet some of the movers and shakers of our world and pick from their brains and learn from their experiences, which you can take to become a better leader.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I think I didn't exaggerate a tiny bit when I said this is the most exciting panel of this conference. No. So huge round of applause, please, for Jewel and José Manuel.